Hey guys, it's time to start section 2 of chapter 4, which is evolution, natural selection and evolution. All right, so we start off with, of course, when we say natural selection and evolution, we automatically think of Charles Darwin. He was a naturalist in England in the 1800s and late 1800s, and he observed that all of the organisms in a population differ slightly from each other. Well, that wasn't any big news. We know that the organisms differ slightly from each other. Think of three siblings that have the same parents. They are very, very different from each other. And every single organism in the whole world is the exact same thing. They are different from each other. And so they're different in form, meaning how they're shaped, in function, how they work, and in behavior. So, and some of these differences in the organisms are hereditary, meaning they get passed down from parent to offspring. And he proposed the idea that the environment exerts a strong influence over which individuals are going to survive to produce offspring. And some individuals have certain lucky traits that make them more likely to survive and reproduce than other individuals. And what that means is that with natural selection, because it is nature making the choice, okay, natural selection is a process in which individuals have some favorable adaptations that make them better adapted to their environment. And when they are adapted to their environment, they are more successful when they go to have babies, or they're less adapted individuals would. He proposed that over many generations, natural selection is going to cause the populations to change, and evolution is that what you call that, the change in characteristics of a population from one generation to the next. So let's take this slide and take another look at it. Okay, so natural selection is a process by which individuals have favorable variations. All right, let's say, look at this picture down here. Okay, of course my head's in front of it, but you can make it happen. All right. So in this picture at first, that mice population, some were brown and some were black, and it didn't matter much. Some were brown and some were black, and that's just how they came out. Well, the bird can see the brown ones more easily because in that environment, the soil is very dark. Okay, the soil is very dark in that environment, so the light-colored mice got eaten really quickly. And if you could see behind my head, over time, there's less and less of the light mouse and only the dark mouse. What's going to happen is, if the bird is eating up all of the light-colored mice, okay, when the dark-colored mice, they survive and they get to grow up. When they go to looking for a mate, all the light-colored mice have been eaten. The only mate they can find is more dark-colored mice. And you know that if you mate together a dark-colored mouse and a dark-colored mouse, eventually, every once in a while, you'll still have a light-colored mouse born. But if you keep mating together dark-colored mice and dark-colored mice, eventually all of the babies are going to be dark-colored. You have just changed the population. You didn't do it. The mice didn't take a vote and said, hey, why don't we just start having dark-colored babies? The mice didn't take a vote and decide. All right, nature decided in that environment the soil is dark, and therefore the dark-colored mice survived. Now, if the environment changed, something happened to the soil, and now all of a sudden dark-colored soil is not a good thing, then evolution can happen again. It can change. But as long as it stays steady like that in that population, if you continue with a steady, stable environment, you can go so many generations that now all of a sudden there aren't any light-colored mice ever. You have just changed the whole population. You have done evolution, and it takes many, many generations. It's not going to happen right away. All right, because if at first you have a bunch of light and dark babies being born every population, in the next generation, even if you have a dark and a dark mom and a dark dad, you're still going to have a couple of light babies because it's there in the genetics. And then the next generation and the next generation. Eventually, it takes many, many generations, but eventually there are no more light-colored mice in the whole population. And then you have done evolution. Evolution has happened because of natural selection. Natural selection. Nature selected. The dark-colored mice won out because the earth was dark, the soil was dark. They didn't decide to change. Hey, you know, this bird, he keeps eating up all the light brown mice. Let's not have any more light brown babies. They didn't get to have a meeting and decide that. Nature decided it for them. That's what we mean by natural selection. And if you keep that continually, eventually you can change a whole population, and that's what we call evolution. So Darwin saw that nature is going to select for certain traits, like sharper claws or anything of that sort, because the organisms with that trait are more likely to survive and reproduce. Over time, the population is going to include a greater and greater proportion of the organisms with that beneficial trait. And as the populations of a given species change, so does the whole species. This is what we were just talking about. Let's take an example of crabs, okay? There's hard shell crabs and soft shell crabs, all right? And all of a sudden, and you know, in their little environment, they're just always some hard, some soft, some hard, some soft. But in this example, let's say we have more of the soft shell, because the hard shell, it takes more calcium, it takes more energy to build a hard shell, and so we have a lot more soft shells. Well, all of a sudden this predator bird gets introduced in the environment. He picks off and he eats the soft shells. All right, so that eventually there's only, like most of the time, there's hard shell crabs left. Now when those hard shell crabs go to look for somebody to mate with, the soft shell crabs are all gone. He only has hard shell crabs to mate with. Then all of a sudden their babies become hard shell. And then, you know, we have to adapt. And I'm going to get to that some more in coevolution. So I'm going to come back to this crab story in just a second. All right, so do you see how the population can change, right? If these are better suited to their environment, whatever trait they have that makes them better suited to their environment, that means they're going to survive longer to have kids and pass those genes on. These are the 5 main points of Darwin's theory. Now I'm going to go over the basics with this number right here, but when you're looking at it in your notes, I want you to read these very carefully, okay, because it helps explain it. So the first part of Darwin's theory is that organisms have a lot more offspring than are expected to survive. Think of rabbits or bugs. Okay, a spider is going to have a heck of a lot more babies than is expected to survive. Rabbits, they're basically on everybody's lunch menu. All right, so they're going to have a lot more babies than expected to survive. But it's not just that, it's every organism. There's some extreme examples, but every single organism, or just about, is going to have more babies than it's expected to survive. The second part says nature is hostile. The environment is hostile and it has very limited resources. So that means the ones that are born are going to have to fight to get food and other resources. There's not enough food for everybody. There's not enough land for everybody. There's not enough anything for everybody. So the ones with the best traits, that's number 3, the organisms have different traits. And so 4, the ones that, if they have traits that are good, that allow them a little edge, it gives them just an edge so that they can get the food they need. They can get, even if it's like 3 seconds faster than the other one. Okay, even if it's just 3 seconds faster to get their food or get away from a predator, or claws that are just a little bit sharper in order to make that final kill. It doesn't have to be much of a change. Even the littlest bit of a trait, even the little bit of an advantage is still an advantage. And if they survive another day, they survive another day. It doesn't have to be a big, overwhelming change. Evolution happens in tiny, little, bitty, small steps. This one's claws are just a little sharper than its brothers and sisters. And then his babies are just a little sharper than his brothers and sisters. And then that one's just a little bit sharper. So eventually the ones with the sharpest claws are the ones who are eating better. They get their kill more often. They have healthier lifestyles. They have food available. And that way when the mothers go to have babies, the babies are stronger because the mother was stronger. So any small advantage is still an advantage. And so over time, the ones who have advantages start to populate more within the ecosystem. So you have more and more of the ones with the advantageous trait, and they start out competing the other ones. And now it's only the advantageous ones. And then the next thing comes along that helps to build up something good. Here's another. So in this example, okay, this is an example of a deer population that, we got one more click? Yeah, okay. This is an example of a deer population that got isolated into a very cold area, okay, up on a high mountain or something like that, somewhere where it's cold all the time. In that population, some of the genes had thin fur, and some of the deer had genes for thin fur, and some of the deer had genes for thick fur. Just natural part of the same with us. We all have different hair. All right, so some of the deer had thin fur and some of the deer had thick fur. So these deer, once you got stuck up in that cold mountainy area, the ones with the thin fur started to freeze to death over the winter. And the ones with thick fur were able to survive. And so the next generation, when those babies started to for mates, when they grew up enough to look for mates, the mates that were around were the ones who survived the cold winter. The mates that they found were the ones with the thick fur, because everyone else died off. And so if you have a thick-furred baby mating with another thick-furred baby, thick-furred deer mating with another thick-furred deer, then most likely the babies would be thick fur. This is an adaptation. Okay, it's a process of becoming adapted or better suited to the environment. And it's, again, behind my head, but you have three choices of adaptations. They can be anatomical, physiological, or behavioral. Those are three kinds of adaptations. Three kinds of adaptations: anatomical, physiological, or behavioral. And let me tell you about those. Anatomical means how you're built. Some of the pandas had like a wrist knuckle that allowed them to hold their bamboo better. Okay, and that means they got to eat better. So that's anatomical, how you're built. All right, physiological, how your body runs. When we made the switch over being cold-blooded to warm-blooded, right? How your body runs, that's physiological. So anatomical is how you're built, physiological, how your body runs, and then behavioral, of course, how you act. Like when the naked mole rats first decided to live underground. Or prairie dogs or anything else that lived underground, when they first decided to live underground, that's a behavioral trait. Those are all adaptations, and it'll improve your ability to survive and reproduce. Three types of adaptations: anatomical, how you're built; physiological, how your body runs; and behavioral, what you do. Here's our deer example with some more pictures. Okay, down here in the bottom, down in the glen, okay, they all had mixed up thin fur, thick fur. Somehow or another they got stuck up in the tops of the mountains where it was cold, and the thin-furred population all started to die out. So when the ones who survived started looking for mates, the only mates around had thick fur. Okay, so that's how the population can change. Now the thing about it is, if these two populations come back in contact with each other, they'll get mixed up again. The only way that it's going to stay different is if they stay separated, and that's called speciation, making new species. Okay, you'll learn about that in biology. Now this is a film clip that I would love for you to watch. This is how polar bears came into existence. All bears at first were brown. Every bear at first was brown. So this goes through how the evolution works to make polar bears. Okay, so that would be fun for you to watch too. And this is a funny little song about adaptations. Okay, it's a little ridiculous, but it is a funny little song about adaptations. In this case, adaptations of a camel. All right, now here's the coevolution that I was talking about. All right, let me go over some of the details, and I'm going to bring up those crabs again that I was talking about. Okay, first, coevolution. Okay, so the process of two species involving over long-term interactions with each other is called coevolution. You see the word evolution, and the word in front of it, coevolution. Co means together. All right, so this is evolving together. These two different species have changed in response to one another over the many generations. This example is a Hawaiian honeycreeper, and you can't hardly see in this picture, but he has a really long, pointy, crooked beak. All right, and he has evolved that long, crooked beak in response to his favorite food, the lobelia flower. Lobelia, it's a fun name. Lobelia flower. Okay, this flower has structures. The honey packet is really, really low, the nectar, but on the tip of the lobelia flower is the pollen. So when the honey creeper goes in to get his nectar, the pollen gets on his head. So when he goes to the next lobelia flower, he takes that pollen that he got from the first one, okay, and drops it off on the next one. So he's pollinating these flowers. Now, the reason it's coevolution, you know, bees are going to pollinate everything, right? Why isn't it a bee? Why is it this honey creeper? Because here's the thing. Like when bees are bringing pollen around to the other flowers, if you drop a pollen from a rose onto a pollen from a daisy, if you drop the pollen from a rose onto a daisy, that pollen is lost. That pollen is wasted. That pollen can't make a seed. The only way that you'll get a new rose is if you drop pollen on another rose. So do you see why the plants don't want to waste their pollen? It won't do them any good if that pollen gets to the wrong kind of flower. All right, so here's where we get the honey creeper in. The honey creeper is one of the only animals that can get deep enough into this, where the nectar is down at the bottom of this flower, and get the pollen on top. And he knows that since he's the only one who can get to the lobelia flower, the next time he finds another lobelia flower in the forest, there's likely to be nectar there because only honey creepers can reach it. So he knows that that lobelia flower is going to have food available for him because he's the only one who can reach it. The lobelia flower knows that since only honey creepers eat their nectar, only honey creepers will get their pollen, and most likely the next flower that a honey creeper goes to will be another lobelia, and the pollen doesn't get wasted. Do you see how it's a good thing for both of these guys? The honey creeper has a meal. Whenever he sees a lobelia flower, he knows there's a meal because only honey creepers can eat this. The bees can't get it. The ants can't get it. The monkeys can't even get it. All right, so only the honey creepers can get this thing. So he knows there's going to be a meal for him. The lobelia flower knows that once he's put the pollen on top of this honey creeper, he's most likely going to another lobelia flower, so the pollen's not wasted. That is coevolution. They have developed in response to one another. The next one is another example. Oh, no, some more about the honey creepers. Okay, so what we said was the honey creeper's adaptation is his long curved beak. The lobelia has that sweet nectar that he wants, but also the flower structure that forces the pollen onto his head. Okay, there you can see his curved beak there in that picture. Okay, all right. Now, the ant and the acacia is another example. All right, acacia trees, this is in South America or Central America. Okay, the acacia tree has hollow thorns right here, down here at the bottom. Okay, these are the thorns, and they're hollow on the inside. All right, the ants build their nest in here, and underneath the leaves, there are holes where the nectar drips out. Kind of drips down here, and it lands up in the nest. All right, so this is a really, really amazing deal for the ants. They got a house and they got a food supply right there next to each other. All right, so what does the acacia get out of this? These ants are like our fire ants. I don't know that they're fire ants, but I know that they're mean. All right, what the ants are going to do is they are going to fight to defend their acacia tree from anybody else who's going to eat it. Take a look at this. Let's see. You see that goat? Okay, so the ants are going to fight off that goat. He's going to bite him on the nose, and the ants are going to, like a whole swarm of them, fighting that goat, so he gets off of there and tries to find something else to eat. All right, so this is another product of coevolution. The ants and the acacia tree have developed in response to one another. The plants wouldn't have evolved those hollow thorns or the nectar pores unless the ants had been there, unless it was affected by the ants. And the ants wouldn't have evolved the herbivore defense unless they had been affected by the acacia plants. So this is like a coevolution. That brings us back to the crabs I was talking about. Do you remember the soft shell and hard shell crabs I was telling you about? Okay, at first in the ecosystem they were all soft shells, or mostly soft shells. Eventually there's a hard shell one, but it's a lot of calcium and a lot of energy to build that hard shell. So most of them were soft shell. But then all of a sudden, this predator bird gets introduced into the population, and he starts eating up all of the soft shells. Okay, so now most of the time, now when the crabs are looking around for somebody to mate with, they're all hard shells. All right, and so the hard shells are mating with other hard shells, and now you have a whole bunch of more hard shells in the population. Here's where we get to the coevolution part. Some of those predator birds are built with stronger muscles in their face, just like for humans. Like some of us are built like football players, and some of us are built like baseball players. Okay, some of those birds had bigger musculature in their beak. Not much, just a little, but enough that they could start cracking open the hardshell crabs. So now the hardshell crabs are starting to get eaten. There are some that are a little bit harder shells, and they were able to survive. Now all of a sudden the shells are a little bit harder. And then some of the birds have a little more muscle, and they kill the hard shells. Then the hard shells have a little bit more hard, and the birds have a little more muscle, and a little bit hard, and a little bit more muscle, and that's how they evolve together. So it can be good things or bad things. It can be positive or negative. Either way, it is evolving together. Now, we've been talking so far about natural selection. What about artificial selection? We can do this too. It doesn't just have to be nature doing this. We can do it, and we call it artificial selection. It's a breeding of organisms by humans for specific desirable characteristics. Dogs and other domestic animals have been bred for certain characteristics. We all know that all the dogs we have, came initially from wolves. Humans did that. We started breeding the dogs for what we wanted. But it's not just dogs and pigs and cows and horses. It's not just that, but plants and animals too. Plants as well. Fruits and grains and vegetables, the food we eat. Again, it's behind my head, but this first here, right here, is a weed that grows on the shoreline in Europe. All right, from this one weed, okay, farmers have chosen, you see right here, we save seeds. Humans will save seeds from the largest and sweetest fruits, and by selecting for those, they have directed the evolution for crops for larger, sweeter fruit. We bred from this one thing, we bred cabbages and Brussels sprouts, kale. I can't tell what's in here. I know broccoli's in here somewhere. Okay, I can't see what's under there. But it's all came from this one plant where we bred for the things we wanted. Somebody liked the taste of the little Brussels sprout things. So one year they planted the strongest of those Brussels sprouts. And then the next year they planted the strongest. And the next year they planted the strongest, or the ones that they liked the best. They didn't plant them all, just the ones they liked. Okay? Planted seeds from the plants they liked, and that changed the whole species and separated them into all of these different types. It's artificial selection. Now, a problem that happens because of that is we've accidentally done this with bacteria and pesticides. Okay, pesticides and antibiotics. Okay, so we've created some evolution that we didn't mean to. You know how humans are always messing up the world, right? Humans are always messing up the world. We did this. Okay, so sometimes humans can cause populations of organisms to evolve unwanted adaptations. And this is called resistance. It's the ability of an organism to tolerate a chemical or disease-causing agent. So the organism might be resistant to a chemical if it breaks down the gene that allows it into harmful substances. I've got an example to show you in just a second. Okay, so humans promote the evolution of resistant bacteria by trying to control pests and bacteria with chemicals. All right, now let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. All right, so think about for bacteria and antibiotics, okay? And I've got an example for you here on the next slide. Antibiotics, and that's like, this is what this video is going to show you. Antibiotics kill bacteria, but they don't kill anything else. And the trouble is they're not going to kill every single one of the bacteria. Every so often when you try to take antibiotics, you'll kill a whole bunch of bacteria, but one or two of them have some sort of genetic trait that make them strong enough to withstand the medicine. Every once in a while, one or two bacteria are strong enough to withstand the medicine. The medicine kills everything else except those couple that are strong. Then those couple that are strong start to reproduce. Now when you send the medicine across, they're all strong bacteria, and the medicine doesn't do anything. So you have to put out stronger medicine. All right, and so the stronger medicine kills the stronger bacteria, but there's still always some that are a little bit stronger, have some sort of gene trick that allows them not to be killed off by this new stronger chemical. And now you've killed off all the strong ones, and there's even stronger ones left over. Then they start to reproduce. Then you need a stronger antibiotic, and it kills most of them, but there's some left that are even stronger. Then they start to reproduce, and you need an even stronger antibiotic until the point where, and we are there now, there are bacteria we cannot kill. We haven't developed anything strong enough, and it's because of us giving too many antibiotics if we don't need it and letting them get stronger. So that's antibiotics with bacteria. The same thing happens in the world with pesticide and plants and bugs. Pesticides and bugs. Okay, so this example here is a pesticide that's designed to kill grasshoppers on corn. All right, and when you first spray the pesticide on the corn, yes, you will kill most of the grasshoppers. All right, yes, but there's going to be one or two that you don't kill. Those one or two where all of a sudden something in their genetics made that pesticide not work on them. So you've killed most of the bugs. There's only one or two left. those one or two mate with each other, their babies are also resistant to the pesticide. So eventually it takes a little while, but those babies have babies and those babies have babies, and now it's time to spray the corn again because you've got a whole bunch more grasshoppers on it again. You spray the pesticide again, you did it right, you put the right amount on there, but this time almost none of them die because they're babies of those ones who were resistant. So you have to get stronger and stronger pesticides, and those nasty pesticides are going to make you all sick. Okay, so the pesticides sprayed on corn to kill the grasshoppers will kill most of the grasshoppers, but those that survive happen to have some sort of gene that protects them from this pesticide. These surviving insects are going to pass that gene onto their babies. And so every time the corn is sprayed, more and more grasshoppers that are resistant enter the population. You kill the weak ones, but now you have stronger and stronger ones that are surviving. And eventually the entire population is going to be resistant, and that pesticide will be completely useless. It happens. It has happened. Okay, so the evolution of resistance to a pesticide starts when it's sprayed on the corn. This is a bigger picture so you can see it. Okay, killing most of the insects. You see here's one and here's one, they didn't die. All right, so now you have all of their babies. All right, you try to spray it again, and most of them, see, it doesn't happen all at once. Evolution is very slow. All right, you were still able to kill some of them, but a lot more of them survived. And so the next time you have to spray even sooner, and then even sooner, and less will kill each time. So that is natural selection in a nutshell. Okay, so there you'll have like chapters and chapters of this on biology. It goes a lot deeper than what we've gone here. But this is kind of a basic idea. So the summary here is like the naturalist Charles Darwin used the term natural selection. Remember, nature decides, not the people or the organism. Nature decides what is useful and what is not. So he termed natural selection to describe the unequal survival and reproduction that results in the presence or absence of particular traits. Okay, remember, it's natural selection. The environment decides, not the organism. And the environment chooses which ones are best suited, and it kills off the others. Darwin realized that natural selection is responsible for evolution, which is the change from the genetic characteristics of a population from one generation to the next. If you have nature selecting for, remember, the dark mice, if you have nature selecting to let the dark mice live and pulling out the light-colored mice, eventually the whole generation will be dark-colored, and the whole population will be dark-colored. You let that continue on, and you have a whole new species. This is what we're talking about, evolution. That's the second bullet. The third bullet says, by selecting which domestic animals, this is where we were doing it, which domesticated animals and plants to breed, humans have also caused evolution by artificial selection. We've actually changed the evolution of some of our species because we were deciding. Instead of letting nature decide, we decided, and that's called artificial selection. But doing that, we have unintentionally created pests and bacteria that are completely resistant to pesticides and bacteria, and it's a really, really scary thing, especially in the hospitals. Bacteria resistance is a real scary thing. All right, so this is some of the stuff we've done for evolution. I hope this kind of makes good sense, and watch the film clips that are included, especially the one with the polar bear to help you explain how natural selection works. Okay, and the one with the little bacteria to show you how bacterial resistance, antibiotic resistance occurs. They will really, really help you understand. All right, and other than that, you guys have a good day, and I've enjoyed our talk.